This is the Paycheck to Daycheck Reselling Podcast.
I'm Liz.
And I'm Ashley.
Together, we have been making money online collectively for over 10 years.
Our mission is to help you start, learn, and grow a reselling business and to inspire you to turn your paycheck into a daycheck.
The world is changing, and we want to help you change with it. Welcome back to another episode of the Paycheck to Daycheck podcast. Today is going to be podcast episode number 99, which ironically, 1999 is when I graduated from high school, which that completely ages me. So I feel like I'm much older than you are, even though I'm probably not, but I just feel that way. So today's episode, we're going to do a Q&A. So on social media, we polled our audience. We started off with our private Facebook group, asked people in there, what questions do you have about reselling? And then we also did it on Instagram. As a reseller, what is a question that you guys have? So we have a few questions that we're going to answer on today's episode. So we're going to start out with Jennifer from our Facebook group. And she asked, I'm an everything seller on 3 sites, just over a year part-time. Because I source from many different places, I've been keeping track of items bought and amount paid to get each item's cost. I believe I am doing accrual inventory and not cost inventory, but I wonder if keeping track of every single item is better. I have not been keeping my own itemized inventory tracking sheet, or what would be the pros and cons of average COG, which is cost of goods, versus per item cost of goods. I feel like this is kind of a tough question because there's pros and cons with each. So there is the accrual inventory and then the cash inventory. So it depends on if you want to tie a cost of goods to that item when it sells, or are you tying a cost of goods to that item when you buy it. Casey and I used to do where we had the inventory spreadsheet and each item we had a cost of goods tied to it. And so really we wouldn't factor it in until the item sold. Now we do the cash. So we just have what we pay every month. We have it all on our credit card, and that's the amount that we're paying for inventory. So we don't really tie it per item. This is just my opinion. I would do the cost per item if you're just starting off. And one of the reasons I think that is very important is because you want to see what you're making per item. And you're going to learn what items are profitable and what items aren't profitable. If you have no idea what that item cost, then how are you going to really factor in, what are you really earning from that item when it sells? What did it sell for? What was the shipping? What were the fees? Plus the cost of good. How much did you honestly make from that item? What's your feelings on that?
I think that was the perfect answer, actually. As you were talking, I was thinking about your last point, and I couldn't agree with that more. I think that's how I started as well. I wanted to know exactly what I was making off of every single item, and that plays a part in your education of learning how to source better too. So I think once you're at a point where you're very comfortable with the way that you're sourcing, the amount that you're making, knowing the amounts that you need to make, you can kind of switch your methods. But yeah, I think that was the perfect answer. If you want to learn more about accrual versus cash, in our episode with my reseller Jeannie, we did talk about that a little bit. They have more videos about this subject specifically on their YouTube channel, which maybe we can link to that for you guys in the show notes. But yeah, they would definitely be someone to check out if you want to get into more detail, because obviously we're not accountants or tax professionals or anything like that. But that I would agree with Liz's answer, has 100%.
Bookkeeping and things like that, that is something that nobody wants to do, but you have to do. I mean, you're a business. You have to make sure that you're tracking things properly. We're in the process of switching CPAs, which has been a complete nightmare. And I will share more. That will be an entire episode. And I'm hoping through this new experience with this new person we're working with that we can have that person on the podcast and talking more about accounting and bookkeeping and things like that. But my reseller Genie is a really good software. It's what Casey and I use starting this year. So I'm really excited because I feel like tax time is going to be way easier than it had been in the past. But before, we kind of did our own spreadsheets, and I really wish, looking back, that high school did more with accounting and things like that. Like, they don't really prep you for that. They just throw you out in the wild. And the only way that you have experience in it is if you do take that in college or, go on and maybe become an accountant. So that's definitely something that resellers have to take seriously. You want to know your numbers. Like, you can't just ignore them. You're running a business. You have to learn that side of the business. But I do think my reseller, Jeannie, because Faith is a reseller and Paul is an accountant, they knew the need and the demand from the community. So that's definitely something to check out. Like Ashley said, they do have a lot of tutorials. Even if you don't even want their software, you're not going to use it, they have a lot of good videos that you can watch that you can better understand accounting.
All right, so the next question is from Matthew, also from our Facebook group. And his question is, I've been reselling clothing on eBay, Poshmark, and Mercari since March. In May, I was up to selling approximately 1 item per day, but I've stagnated there. How can I best increase my sales per day? This is going to sound maybe a little bit general because we don't have all the specifics, but I would definitely say, listing more is going to increase your chances of selling more because you're going to have, it's a numbers game, right? You're going to have more items listed on those platforms. I would definitely make sure that you're doing proper research on the items that you're sourcing as well, making sure that you're buying items that are going to sell within a timeline that you need them to sell in. If you're buying items that maybe don't have the best sell-through rate, you're going to end up hanging on to them for longer. So maybe looking into sourcing items that have a better sell-through rate than what you're sourcing now, making sure that you're active on those platforms. So eBay, for example, it's not just about listing on eBay. You want to be sending offers and, editing your listings, going in, changing the prices slightly. Even if you, drop a price by a couple cents, it's like activity. You're like feeding the eBay beast, right? So it's activity that they're sensing on your account, communicating with your customers, making sure you're answering any questions, doing new pictures for items that are maybe a little bit older. Maybe you go back and you're like looking at the first few items that you photographed. You're like, these maybe don't look the best. Going through and like refreshing the pictures. Yeah. What do you think? Any advice you want to send out there?
Well, I think and this is what's crazy, because I feel like with our podcast, some of the stuff that I think of now is completely different than what I said like in the beginning. So yeah. I don't know. Reselling is forever changing. And I think that's something to really keep in mind. I feel clothing is becoming very competitive. There's a lot of sellers. So if you're mainly selling clothing, I would look at trying to add other categories. So that could be another thing that you can do to try to increase sales. I don't know his business, but if it's mainly clothes, like think about adding other things like hard goods or sporting goods or maybe some electronics or some media, something like that. I think really having a diverse store is very important now. If you go all in on clothing, unless you have very specific brands that you're selling, a lot of the brands I just think they're oversaturated. I mean, if you look at how many North Face items are listed on eBay, there's a ton. Like, there's just not going to be a lot of value in those clothes. So maybe going to Ross or Target or Walmart and then adding some retail arbitrage on top of like thrifting and things like that. Just trying new things. But also I do agree with making sure that you are active on those platforms, sending the offers, lowering the price. On eBay, you can bulk edit and you can lower the price by a certain percent or maybe a dollar amount. I know I've done that on our eBay. I have sorted by the oldest items, bulk edited maybe the first 300 oldest items, and then lowered the price by 5%. And I've done that for like 4 weeks straight. And we really did start selling some of those older items. So that sometimes helps. I price things a little higher than what everyone else does because in my mind, I can wait it out. But now we started selling stuff more competitively just to move items. So those are just some of the tips that, if he's listening, that he can take, and hopefully he will start getting more sales. All right. The next one is from Rebecca, and also in our Facebook group. This is a numbers game, but my question is, assuming we are picking up good items, do we sell more by having more listings? I am an everything seller part-time and want to, parentheses, desperately, go full-time. I have 1,500 listings and want to be at 3,000 in the next 6 months and then double that by next Christmas. Sourcing and space, not a problem for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is another thing where I'm like, all I can go back to is like Casey and I were in that same position where we were like, we had a number of listings that we wanted to hit. Like we wanted to be over that 1,000. Like that was like, to us, we felt like that is what we want to reach. We want to get over 1,000. I don't know if I would set number of listings as like a goal versus maybe more of a number for sales. Because what I'm finding for us, we have been listing less because we're finding higher price point items and more profitable items. So we have the number of items that we've sold in the last 30 days on eBay is way less than what we sold the previous 30 days. But our sales are more because we're buying the items that are higher price point. So that's a tricky thing. I like that she's an everything seller because that opens her up to finding categories that maybe she can find those items that are the higher price point. We focus a lot on, like I said before, sporting goods. So we're looking for golf clubs. Football pads have been selling really good for us because it's back to school and kids are starting football again. Baseball bats, batting gloves, things like that, where I don't want to buy a t-shirt that's going to sell for $15 that I have to photograph. And I'd have to sell 5 of those in order to make up for one item that's maybe like a lacrosse helmet or something like that. I'd rather just sell that one lacrosse helmet for $50 than to have to sell 4 or 5 t-shirts to get to that dollar amount.
So I think there's obviously multiple ways of doing things, and however you want to structure your business is up to you. Yes, like I said before, it is a numbers game. So if you have more listings, you're more likely to be more visible to people that are searching, and there's more options for them to bundle items, and you have the potential to sell more to one person. But like Liz said, you're also spending a lot of time sourcing and listing and photographing and sending offers and packaging things. So if you could, sell one big item and make the same amount that you would off of like 20 smaller items, I would much rather personally just source, list, and sell that one big item, So that might be something to look into. Like if I were you, what I would do is, if you're wanting to go full time that badly, I would experiment for the next 3-4 months and try to raise your ASP. So let's say your average sale price right now is like $27. I would see if you could get it up to like $40, and if you can do that, then I think you're gonna be a little bit happier in like what you're spending your time on too. So that's what I would do if I were you.
There's also people that would say the opposite. There's some that are very high volume sellers that they're okay with, like we said, having 4 or 5 t-shirts that they know they're going to sell for $15. So it depends on like, what do you envision spending your time on? Because really, to get to that many items, like unless you have like a wholesale connection to get that high with those higher ticket items, it's going to be, it can be a little bit more challenging because it's going to take longer to find those items. They're not, you're going to have to do more sourcing. So maybe instead of finding the items that sell for less and you spend more time listing, maybe you're just spending more time sourcing. So it really just depends on what you want to do in your business.
All right. So the next one is from one of our friends, Kate. Her IG handle is From Kate to Great. If you want to look her up, she's amazing. She sells a lot of stuff on Amazon. She's very, very knowledgeable, and we would love to have her on the podcast sometime. And the question is for Liz, but I'll read it, and Liz, you can answer it. So the question is, what classes or courses or learning did you do to learn Amazon private label?
When we first started, we did pay for a course. I'm not against courses. I think courses are great. I think it just depends on who you're buying it from. At the time, This was back in 2016. There was not a lot of information or, free content out there about selling Amazon private label. And if you're unfamiliar, it's way different than retail and online arbitrage or wholesale. With private label on Amazon, you are trying to find a product that you can then source from a supplier, put your brand name on that particular product, you buy in bulk, and then you are the only one on that Amazon listing, and you are creating a brand of products. So one of the products that we sell is clear bags. So that was one of the brands that we were going to do, was called Clear Choice Bags, and we were going to sell clear bags. Right now we only have one. It's a drawstring backpack, but you could then take that brand and then build a bunch of other products around it. So maybe we would add a fanny pack or some other bags to go with it. So that's what private label is. So it's a lot different than, going into Walmart, scanning products. Those brands are already on Amazon. You can see how well they're selling. There's a lot of data, but with private label, you are the brand. You're the one that's creating that product and trying to sell that item. So we learned through Kevin David. He had a course out, and it was his Amazon FBA course, and it was $997 at the time. And that was probably the best $1,000 we have ever spent, because it got us to where we are right now. I liked his course, and the reason why we took it is because all the information was in there. So it was from start to finish. He started with, how do you even find a product? Like, where do you start? Where do you find suppliers? What do you need for your product? You're going to need and this is a very, very broad explanation. I mean, I could go into private label for hours, but how do you package it? What do you need for your package? Like, what do you need to have on it? What does Amazon need? How do you create the listing? Because if you're selling on Amazon and you find an item at Walmart, that listing is already up. You don't have to do anything. You're just adding it to your Amazon catalog, and you're shipping that item in to sell. With private label, you are creating everything. So there is a lot to do with private label. So we took his course, and that was how we learned. But if you are curious and you're listening and you want to know more about private label, I highly recommend going to Jungle Scout. That's the software that Casey and I use. We have been using Jungle Scout from day one, and you would use the software to find those products that you can then private label. But they have a $1 million case study on their YouTube that takes you from start to finish and explains everything you need. So you don't technically need a course anymore, because there is that free information. But there are a lot of courses out there. So that's where I would start if you're interested in private label. I would go to Jungle Scout and I would binge watch. I think they're on their 5th season. But binge watch all of their $1 million case studies, and you will learn so much about their software and the process of private label. The next question is from Tila. She's also in our Facebook group. What are some of your best tips for starting on Amazon? So far, I've made an account and have started scanning some barcodes and requesting approvals, but I'm not really sure where to go from here. Once I do find something profitable and get approval, what's next? That's the best step, is to start scanning items. And if you do find something where you're like, okay, great, I'm approved for this item, I can sell it. You look and it looks like it has a good sales rank. There's not many sellers. The sale price with all the Amazon fees, because you really need to take that into consideration, you will make a profit. Well, then you're going to buy that product. And if it was something that you found that you're like, this is an item where I can make $20 on this item, what I would do personally, I would go on a road trip, and I would go to wherever you found that item. I would go to other stores in other cities, and I would try to find that particular item. So I think really, once you find it, buy it, and then you're going to have to create your shipping plan. So when you bring it home, make sure you take off any store tags. Never send in an item into Amazon that has like a raw sticker on it, where somebody can be like, oh, I just paid $50 for something that somebody bought for $4.99. Like, make sure you do that. That should be number one. And then you're going to add that item to your Amazon catalog, and then you're going to send it into Amazon. You create a shipping plan, and then you ship it into Amazon. And then that's the best thing about Amazon with Fulfillment by Amazon, the FBA, is that once it goes in there to the warehouse, they are in control of it. Once it sells, they pick, pack, and ship it to the customer. So that is a huge benefit with Amazon.
All right. So the next question is from Anonymous, and they asked, what is Google Lens and how do you use it? I see people mentioning it all the time in relation to reselling and doing research on items, but it seems like everyone except for me knows what it is. Google Lens is a tool that you can use on your phone. I've never, actually, that's a lie. I have used it on my desktop, but all right, so you're going to download Google Photos from your App Store or Play Store or whatever it is, and then you can take a screenshot of an item or take a picture of an item, and you select that item, and then at the bottom, there's going to be there's a couple different icons. There's an icon for share, edit, lens, and delete. So if you hit lens, it's going to start thinking. It's going to read the picture, right, of what you selected, and then it's going to bring up items that are exactly the same, similar, kind of the same, and then you can kind of scroll through and see if you can find that exact same item. So if you're trying to identify the brand of an item, maybe you take a picture. I see this a lot of times in different like Facebook groups. Can someone help me read, what is this brand? What does this tag say? Is this Anthropology? Whatever. And they'll put a picture of the entire like blouse up, right? So what I'll do to help them out is I'll kind of zoom in and just take a screenshot of just the tag, because sometimes if you're focusing on too much, the lens won't be able to identify this item. So if you can zoom in to what you're specifically looking for, so in this instance, it's the tag, screenshot that, zoomed in, and then send it through Google Lens, it'll be more helpful for the lens to identify what that tag is saying, what it is, what the brand is, and then usually it'll spit out some good information for you. If you're having problems with it, just try, like finding a different picture or something, like I said, a little bit more zoomed in or cropped. If there's too much going on around what you're trying to search for, that can distract the lens as well. So if you have a simplified image, that's what's best. So a lot of people use this for research and trying to find items and doing research for sold comps and that sort of thing. But a lot of times it's like, what brand is this? I need to find this item. Looking it up on eBay or Poshmark isn't doing me any good. So then they kind of backtrack to Google. So hopefully that's helpful. I know you can use it on your, desktop or laptop as well. It's been a long time since I've used it on one of those, but I think you can just type in, into your search bar, Google Lens, and it should pop up and you can probably use it pretty much the same way.
The next question we have two from Nikki Kirk, who we have had on the podcast. She is also known as Your Selling Guide. She's huge into Amazon, lots of good information. If you haven't listened to her episode, make sure you listen to it. But she asked, which marketplaces do you find to be the easiest and which ones are the most profitable? So I would say now that I've sold on Poshmark, Mercari, eBay, Amazon, I would say the easiest one has got to be Poshmark. And the reason I say that is it's easy to list, and when you sell something, you don't have to think about shipping. When you list on Poshmark and you sell, they send you the label. On eBay, you have to actually buy the shipping labels, so you have to understand how that works. So I think eBay is a little bit more complex. Amazon, I would say, is the most challenging just because there's so many factors that go into selling on Amazon. You really have to understand how Amazon works. Finding products, understanding which ones have IP alerts or which you don't want to get an IP because that's an intellectual property. Some of the products that you find, you might not technically be able to sell them, and you won't know until you send it in, and then you get an IP alert, which their software, and Nikki has one that she recommends where it will actually tell you if there is an IP alert on that particular item, and then you know to stay away from it. But you need to know so much more with Amazon products. What's the sales rank? How many sellers are on the listing? How much is it selling for? What was the low? What was the high price in the last 30, 60, 90 days? Are you gated, which means are you even allowed to sell that particular brand? Do you need to get ungated, which is the process of getting approval to sell that particular brand? So there's a lot more that goes into Amazon. I think that would be the most challenging marketplace to sell on. And I think Poshmark is the easiest. But on the flip side, I think, in my opinion, the most profitable one is Amazon. Even though it's the most challenging, I think you can make a lot of money on Amazon just because a lot of the prices on Amazon, you can sell items for more than you would on eBay. And the reason is people pay for convenience. If I live in Arizona and there's a product that I used to buy in Illinois and I can't buy it anymore, I might go to Amazon and find that item, but that seller might have it marked up a lot because they know there's a huge demand. And that's what sales rank is. It's telling you how often an item sells, and you can see the price points that people have it at. So you can see the demand of an item more than if you're selling on eBay, where the only thing you can do really is just check sold comps.
Yep, I agree with that. Amazon is just a beast. So yes, it might be more challenging, but it's definitely most profitable, I would say. Then her second part of her question was the best places to start sourcing. Best or favorite? I don't know. So best places to source, I think that's going to depend on what platform you're selling on. So for me, for eBay, like my best places to source are going to be like Target and Walmart, Marshalls, TJ Maxx, places like that. I don't do a lot of used clothing sourcing anymore for like Poshmark, but I still have clothing that I'm working through. So I still have new listings coming up. But yeah, I would say that for eBay, those are my best places to source. What about you, Liz?
We still do a lot of thrifting just because Goodwill, I mean, even though the prices are crazy, you find shoes for $50 at Goodwill now. I mean, they have a lot of stuff priced very, very high, which is frustrating. But on the other hand, you can still find really good items to resell. For us, Goodwill still is up there with a place that we source. I really like finding the smaller stores, whether that's a small thrift store, small grocery store, hardware store. We're really getting into discontinued items and finding things that have a huge demand that you can't really find anymore, which would be discontinued items or just items that, like the example I said before, where there was something in Illinois that I used to buy that I can't find out here. So I think it's just going to those smaller stores where you can find those items that are huge demand. I think that's where I think is a good place to start.
All right, the next question we have is from Amy from Instagram, and she says, I have about 200 listings on eBay. I sell mostly clothes. My sales are down. What can I do to get more? So we kind of answered this earlier in the episode. Clothing it's getting tricky, I think if you're going to be a mostly clothing reseller, you really need to commit to that. If you're not going to branch out, if you're not going to try to find another niche to add to clothing, then you're really going to need to commit to that and figure out what you can do to set yourself apart from all the other clothing resellers. Making sure that you're active, I would say every single day. You're just going to have to figure out a good rhythm for your own business. If if you have 200 listings on eBay right now, make sure that you're, going back through, like we said before, sending offers, lowering prices, bulk editing your listings, doing new pictures, all the things that we mentioned before, I would say. What about you?
I would say don't sell clothing.
Clothing, it has such an easy barrier to entry for resellers. It's so easy to get into it. Like Liz said before, it's getting really, really hard to be competitive in the clothing space, I think. Unless you have...
I think it's also where are you getting your clothing too?
Right.
So if you're going, for me, we couldn't just do clothing just going to Goodwill because those buy costs are getting so high. So if you are a clothing seller, and I'm not saying that you can't be, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying it's just more challenging to do clothing now than it was before. So I would think about, well, can I go to the bins and get some clothes? At least you're getting it at a lower buy cost. So if some of the clothing that you buy, like I've used the North Face example, where there's just such an influx of North Face listings. Everybody's looking for it. Everybody's selling it. You have to sell it for cheap. You just do. Because if you sell it for higher than everybody else, your item's going to sit there because it doesn't have a good sell-through rate anymore. And people are going to, they're going to have a lower price than you. And people are going to buy their item before yours because yours is higher. And people want a deal, especially now, I think. And this is, the way that the economy is, people are buying used items more. So that's a good thing for us, but they're not wanting to pay a lot. They want that deal. They want to get the item at the lowest cost. So that's another thing to think of with clothing. I would maybe focus on just trying to find specific brands. If I were a clothing seller and I was just going to do clothing, I would focus on maybe like 5 to 10 specific brands that have a better sell-through rate, and just go out and just focus on those items. Because then, especially on like Poshmark, if people are saving that brand and you have that one that they like, they might be more likely to bundle with you and buy multiple items instead of just, you've got 200 listings and maybe 3 of them are the same brand. Everything is just so random.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, actually. Like, if you, need to set yourself apart from everyone else, like you said, focusing on just a couple of different brands, that's also going to draw people back to you. If you're doing, these are just examples. It doesn't mean, I wouldn't necessarily pick these, but if you're Anthropologie, Free People, Lululemon, whatever, if those are your brands, which again, not saying that those should be your brands, but if they are, those people that buy those brands are going to come back to see what you have for new listings. It's easier for them to bundle. Another thing that you could do is focus on just a couple sizes. So maybe you're just going to do plus size, maybe, just extra small and small sizes. Something like that, I would say, to focus on. Otherwise, you're gonna run yourself into the ground trying to source everything as far as clothing goes, and you're going to end up burnt out. So you need to figure out what your like niche within the clothing niche is going to be, and then just stick to that and become the professional in that niche within the clothing niche. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and that would be really important to do as well for if you wanted to do live selling. So I've seen a lot of live sales, it's specific brands. So then if you're focusing on those brands, then that would be really good. If you were interested in live selling, then that could be an approach you could take as well. All right, next question from Mark. What are the best categories to sell in if you are just starting out on eBay? And that is a very tough question. So we kind of already talked about clothing is very easy to get into. I mean, we've always suggested, like, if you're just starting out, learn the platform, understand how it works. That's like the most important. Be very careful with some of the categories that you choose. Like if you're going to focus on electronics, like really know a lot about electronics.
Let's see. If you're just starting out on eBay, I would say, honestly, if not clothing, because again, there is like a very low barrier to entry with clothing, but we're moving away from like being clothing sellers, I feel like, right? Because again, it's becoming a little bit saturated and you really have to set yourself apart. Like we said, when we answered Amy's question, I would say, if you are able to do some retail arbitrage, right now is like the perfect time to get into, sourcing like holiday items and stuff like that. There's just an endless amount of stuff out there that people are looking for. You just have to do the research to figure out what those items are. Halloween decorations, Christmas decorations. It's fun to source and it's so easy to list because you're taking pictures of like, let's say it's like an air blown inflatable, right? You're taking pictures of the box, and then you can pull the pictures of it like all set up from, let's say you're sourcing it from Lowe's or Home Depot. You can pull the picture off like the Lowe's website, right? And throw that in there on your eBay listing. And that's it. It takes 2 seconds to pull the pictures, take your own pictures. And then everything, all the information that you need is right on the box or right in the listing from Lowe's or Home Depot. So you're just kind of like adding in your own words, using what they already have for like dimensions and what parts and pieces come with it, filling in the blanks. Basically, it's very easy to list items like that because you're doing essentially no research on what this item is, what parts and pieces come with it, how much does it weigh, what is the size, all that stuff is like already compiled for you. So you're doing a lot less research and it's easy to source that stuff. Pretty much everyone has those stores around them for the most part. If I had to start over on eBay, that's what I would start with, I think. I think it's fun to source that stuff. It's easy to list it. It's selling. People get excited about Halloween and Christmas decorations and, holiday stuff. So that's what I would start with if I was starting eBay right now.
For me, if I were starting out, a lot would depend on where I live. I would go to, do you have a Walmart that does have those good items, or like you said, Lowe's for those holiday items? Or just go to a thrift store and go through the entire thrift store and see, like, what does your thrift store carry? Because a lot of them are different across the country. So for me, it would really depend on what I can find in my area and what I can find a lot of. So maybe you can find like really good shoes, then maybe that's going to be the category that you focus on, is because you can find a lot of good quality shoes. So I think a lot of it would depend on also where you live. Next question we have is from Carol. Can you make a full-time living reselling? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can. I would say I wouldn't quit a job to just start reselling. I think that reselling has to be built up till you get to a point where it can, you have to not only pay your bills, but also make enough reselling to where then you have a budget that you can buy more items and keep feeding the reselling beast. For you, I feel like it was way different than me with, going to full-time reselling, because you got furloughed. So like you were in a position where you had to turn to reselling. For us, we took our time building, and Amazon was really the main reason why we could do that, because we started off, Casey's still working. He still had his full-time job. I was building everything to where it built up to where he could then leave his 6-figure corporate career, which he ended up doing. But it took us a long time to get there. About 3 years, I would say, of me doing Amazon, building up eBay, like just getting to that point where, we could afford to live and he didn't have to work anymore. And there's lots of other things to think of, like health insurance. I mean, we do have health insurance through our business, but that's a huge expense that we pay every month. So those are some things that you have to think of. I think it's definitely possible. I think if you're listening and it's something that you want to do, I would just keep your regular 9-to-5 job as long as you can and just really focus on building up that reselling business.
Yeah, I was pretty desperate to get out of the car business. And then, 2020 happened at like the perfect time for me because I was ready to scream. And I just used that time when I was furloughed to my full advantage and built up my reselling business, because the fact is that I had a limited amount of time to spend on my reselling business while I was still working full time in the car business. Like I only had, after work, I had one day off during the week, and then like weekends. Like that's all the time that I had. And I was up until like 1, 2, sometimes 3 in the morning during the week, like working on stuff because I wanted to quit so badly my full-time job. But I knew that, I didn't want to rely on anyone else, like my parents or something, to help me pay my bills. If I'm going to quit my job, I have to be able to sustain myself. So I just kind of reverse engineered like all my bills. I knew what I needed to make to survive, but I didn't want to just like be barely making it every month. That's like a stressful situation to be in as well. So I also was trying to build up a savings account at the same time, like put a little bit of money away each week and let that build up. I am definitely an impulsive person, and if it had gone on much longer, I probably would have walked away from the car business at some point, within like the first few months of 2020, if I had not ended up furloughed. But it just kind of, like I said, happened to work out for me anyways, where I ended up furloughed and I could kind of dedicate my full-time hours now to reselling because I wasn't doing anything else. I was stuck in my apartment. We couldn't really go anywhere. But if I didn't have that happen, if it didn't happen that way for me, if I wasn't as impulsive as I am, then I hopefully would have stayed, built up my savings account more. Ideally, I would say you want like a minimum of 6 months of your bills saved up, just in case something happens. You just never know like what life is going to throw at you. I've seen resellers end up with broken arms and legs and in car accidents. Like you just don't know. And life just takes these weird twists and turns. And if you quit your job and you don't have money saved up and then you have something happen and you can't pay your bills, that's a huge added stress that you really don't need on top of trying to heal from, an accident or something. It's better to be, I think, prepared than not prepared, especially right now. You just want to be more prepared than less prepared. So make sure you have some money saved away. I would say a minimum, like I said, of 6 months of bills tucked away. Ideally, I would say a year, just again, because you never know. And then you really need to have a great handle on how much your bills are every single month and what you're doing now. Is that going to sustain you? Like, can you pay your bills off your reselling business right now? And if the answer is no, I would say you want to get it to the point where you can live off your reselling business while you're still at your 9-to-5 job and just bank that money, like just save that money and make sure you can sustain that for a couple months, like, because we all know that reselling has its ebbs and flows and different times of the year are better for reselling than others. And to make sure that you can make it through those like tougher times.
And it doesn't take long for all of your funds to be caught up in inventory. So then if you get to a point where you didn't save enough and you want to buy more inventory and you have no more money to buy inventory because it's going, half of what you're making is going towards bills, it's like that's going to be a tough position to be in. So not only to save up enough money for bills, but also to think about the inventory that you're going to buy. Or maybe you come across an opportunity where maybe you can buy out somebody's eBay store and you need $3,000 to $5,000. Like reselling, it takes money to make money. So you really need to, in order to make it a full-time income, you have to set yourself up for success. So you don't want to leave your job too early and not have a way to keep making money if you're not making enough reselling.
So the last question that we have for you guys is from Erica from Instagram, and she asks, how long did it take you guys to see consistency in your businesses? I've been doing this part-time for 3 months now, mostly selling clothing, but I'm starting to get frustrated with the lack of consistent sales. Okay. We've kind of, beaten the clothing thing to death already, so we're not going to talk about that anymore. Things were different when both of us started reselling, right? It was like just a different world. I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2018 was like when I listed my first item, but we talked about this in a previous episode, so you guys can fact check me if you listened to that episode. It was somewhere around there. And I would say, once I started listing items and seeing those items selling, that was like an addicting feeling. So I wanted to list more so I could sell more. So once I started listing consistently, which was again, like after I got out of work and on the weekends and stuff like that, once I started working consistently in my business, that's when I started to see consistent sales. And then as soon as I would lose that consistency in my business, then the sales kind of would plummet. When I was furloughed and then kind of started getting into retail arbitrage, I was very burnt out with the clothing thing, but I was really nervous to jump into anything else because I kind of mastered the clothing thing, right? But I really didn't want to do it anymore. I was so sick of photographing and measuring and all that stuff, right? But I knew that was all I knew, and I knew that I could be good at that and I could make consistent sales, and I was just scared to kind of branch into something else. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am now, which is light years ahead of where I was in 2020. If you want to build consistency, if you want to have consistent sales in your business, then you have to be consistent in your business and everything that you're doing. So sourcing, listing, all of the stuff, right? But I would also, if you're finding that it's just clothing, we've mentioned this, you really need to branch out into something else, I think, and be consistent with that as well.
I would say, yeah, in order to have, consistency, you have to treat reselling like you would any other job. You can't just spend an hour on the weekends and expect all these sales to come in. It really takes a lot of work. And that's one thing that people don't realize until they start reselling, is that there is a lot that goes into it. In order to be consistent, you have to put in the time. I would say that's one of the biggest things. You have to put in more than just 1 hour. You have to spend the time to go out and source items. You have to take the time to prep them, photograph them, list them, things like that. So I really think it is taking a step back and trying to figure out how can you be more efficient? How can you be more consistent with your reselling business?
All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Paycheck to Daycheck Reselling Podcast.
Anything we mentioned in this episode will be linked down below in the show notes or description down below.
Be sure to share this episode with anyone you think it will help and follow us on social media at P2D Podcast.
Thanks again for listening. Keep working towards that Daycheck.